Once upon a time, the land was without form, and there were no boxes on the face of the deep. Many years passed, and slowly a few boxes began to appear. But most of the people just laughed. More years went by, and the boxes began to multiply, faster and faster, until all you could see were boxes. Then one day, a brave man left his box and set out on a lonely journey to a new destination, the unbox. Many years passed, and slowly other explorers joined the journey to the land of the unbox. More years went by, and soon the unboxes began to multiply. Faster and faster, covering the landscape until all the people shouted with one voice, "Let's all live outside the box." And everyone agreed that the ultimate cool was the unbox. Many years passed, and slowly a few brave explorers left the land outside the box and began a journey to a new land to discover the promise of the re-box. Entranced by prospects of that new landscape, these courageous pioneers became squatters in the favelas of Reeboks. But most of the people just laughed. Many years passed, and please welcome Eric Kahn and Russell Thomsen, explorers of that rare land inside the box.
Hello?
Thank you, Eric, for that unexpected introduction. We wanted to also thank everyone in the school for coming out to the lecture. We feel especially appreciative that Eric and Meg and Chris asked us to come back to the school and lecture again. We lectured here quite a long time ago. And it's really a pleasure to deliver a lecture in a place that we've known for as long as we have, and as intimately as we have, and is really where we have grown up in lots of ways. So again, thank you, and it's nice to see a lot of former students and friends here. That really means a lot to us. I think we wanted to start tonight's lecture by talking about the office that we were. And we get a lot of questions about what happened to COA, why the name change, what's going on with that, are you reinventing yourself? And I think that the way we look at it is in the late 80s when we formed COA with our former partner Ron Golan, I think that it was a time when we were younger, obviously, and very eager in a way to proclaim our voice, a voice that was still in formation, but at the same time, advance the slide here. At the same time, we were really thinking about a kind of introspective life as an architect, as the three architects. Which means that we were very interested in interrogating our education, our apprenticeship, time that Eric and I spent working in Europe at Super Studio, and really trying to place ourselves within, and at the same time understand the current of architecture as it was at that moment, and to place ourselves in that and begin to describe for ourselves how our voice might fit into that or not fit into that. So at that time, we were still intensely interested in modern architecture, having passed through the postmodernist period. And this slide really was almost emblematic of a way we felt about our particularly European education and how we wanted to continue to kind of carry this idea of modern architecture across the sea, across the desert, and to Los Angeles. So as I say, this is a moment when we're talking to each other intensely about what architecture was, and at the same time intensely interested in what other architects were doing. It's as if I could characterize it that we were a bit neurotic, walking around talking to ourselves and only to each other. We were engaged in various projects, usually at a smaller scale when they came to building projects, when you're pursuing commissions when you're beginning. And so some of them were built, some of them weren't built, but the language of the buildings was fairly consistent. At the same time, I think we all made a decision to be here in Los Angeles because on one hand, while we were looking at an almost kind of stability of modern architecture, and because it had a history that resonated with us, we were also very interested in being in such a kind of unstable and constantly changing place. A little bit like our friend Neil Denari describes Los Angeles as that we all came here to operate on the city like surgeons because Los Angeles was a patient that would, no matter what you did to it, it wouldn't die. So some of the things that we were interested in besides small projects were really examining this metropolis specifically. So one of the first things we did on our own was to produce a small pamphlet of recombinant photos, which were really trying to capture something simultaneous and delightful in the way that particular parts of the city coexisted and collided.
Let me add something.
Be my guest.
I was just going to say that also I think at that point in time, this is 1989, and City of Quartz still hadn't come out yet. That was 1990, and since Rainer Banham, really no one had theorized LA in a way where we felt there was enough, let's say, momentum to understand how to begin to understand urbanism and architecture within the city. And I think most architects at that point, we felt were practicing object making in the city. And we were very curious about the underlying structure of the city and how we could develop methods and ways of seeing that seemed proper to the mode of Los Angeles. So maybe unlike Ed Richet's analysis of Sunset Boulevard as facades, recombinant images was a way of putting time-space into a kind of blur, a la, the overexposed city, and look at it as a kind of new but tangible urban blur or fabric to work in. And then about 10 years ago, we started teaching and trying to employ scenario planning as a way of moving around the modernist master plan, as a way of dealing with chance and uncertainty and complexity with regard to urbanism. And this was 2 of 4 boards we did for an exhibition, which I think was at the Luckman Center, that was looking at the end of the millennial urbanism in Los Angeles.
And I think that this in particular was interesting to us because it was at a time when we really became aware of and interested in how unstable Los Angeles is and how this idea of planning for a city like this was almost futile.
Well, and also the preconceptions of most plans, developer plans, governmental plans, looked really at cliches and sort of superficial ways of trying to hype the city, if you will. And I think what we wanted to do is find methods that might find and engender deeper structures that we could work on that perhaps were counterintuitive or weren't on the radar.
And at the same time, we were influenced by our former employers, working on projects for exhibitions that were much more about the larger scale of Los Angeles, so making models like that are on the cover of this book and now in the museum, that really tried to understand the nature of the place more than the appearance of the place. So now we are moving to what we call COA 2.0, which is Idea Office. And I think that in changing the office and in losing our former partner Ron and Eric and I sort of reforming the office, we took an opportunity to try to think about the past 20 years or so and to really understand where we had been and now thinking about where we'd like the thing to go. And I think the sort of introspection that I described before lent us a kind of confidence, if you will, to proceed into territory which is less stable, less predictable, in a way less ideological, more messy, and to in a way come to embrace that as a way we might start to face the world and embrace that as a driver for the work. So, this image demonstrates really the kind of dual personality of the architect. On the left, all of the, in a way, qualities that I described that we were pursuing in COA, and on the right, all of the sort of necessary qualities about engaging the world. And the messy part comes from not sort of lying on one side of the spectrum or the other, but understanding that as one works, as we work, different aspects of this kind of duality become highlighted, become useful to us, and the combinations are really constantly changing. So Idea Office, it's not an acronym. It's simply, I think, we came upon it as a very straightforward and simple way to say that what we were interested in is really how to embrace the world of ideas so that they became, in a way, the driver of the work, the thing that could frame the work, and the source of those ideas and the conflict between competing ideas is what interests us in our work now.
Let me add something to that. When Eric invited us to lecture, we were still COA, and it's been a year and a half, I think, since that occurred, and we spent more or less the last year and a half. I mean, the first project of Idea was inventing an idea and thinking about it and talking about it and thinking about the name and thinking about what the next 20 years would allow us to do. The first 20 years COA, the second 20 years Idea, and perhaps the next 20 years another name. But we were kind of amazed at the spectrum of definitions of Idea, and we'd been sitting in juries all day one day, and we both kept hearing people use the word idea, and it was getting annoying because we had already decided we were going to call ourselves Idea. And you keep hearing, you think, is that ours or is that generic? And what's going on here? But when you look at the definitions, the spectrum is kind of amazing, and it allowed us as kind of a bandwidth to operate within, and that's what we wanted with COA. And we felt was getting perhaps a bit narrow, and we wanted to expand the bandwidth ways of thinking. So here you can see it moves anywhere from being an analytic thought or concept to a belief or a conviction, so there's will involved, to intuition or a hunch, which we really like because we work that way often, or a plan or scheme for doing something. So it's purposeful and it's got a projective cast to it as well. And then the last is when we lectured in Michigan last year, one of the questions that came up was, well, how do you guys really work together? And I think we offered a few words. I kept repeating how messy it was and how, what was the other word?
Playful.
No, there was another word.
I don't know.
Vicious?
Perhaps.
Yeah. And how we started off, basically when we were working with other, before we had COA, we began to work together, sort of play together with forums and things like that. And one of the first things that happened was we won an award from the Architecture League in New York. And we sort of produced these models that were basically ways that we were playing with form and learning how to really work together in a set of modalities. We're still working on that, obviously.
So we also did an assessment, if you will, of all the things that we like to do without any kind of judgment about one being better than another. And we realized that we had been involved and very much wanted to stay involved in a variety of things rather than concentrating on any one single thing. And rather than seeing them as competing interests, I think we saw them as things that were all interrelated. And again, implying a kind of messy overlap between things where some ideas move in and out depending on what it is we're working on. So this brings us to the title of the lecture tonight, which is when we were talking about what's the source of the idea or ideas that begin to drive or animate the work, we realized that perhaps a rubric for that was lied in that we were interested in how this coherent, if you will, almost hermetic logic that we had spent 20 years developing, becoming confident in, might intersect a world which was anything but. And when that intersection takes place, you can either see it as a kind of conundrum where one bangs their head on the wall and wishes it weren't so, and in that way maybe tries to avoid a particular problem, or you can embrace the problem, embrace the seeming contradiction or dilemma in the problem, and realize that that's going to put you in a very creative place to solve or propose a solution to a problem. So this notion of a dilemma, and the dilemma coming from, in a way, again, the intersection of our inner life with that of the outer world, became a way for us to start to think about what might drive the work.
So dilemma number one is maybe one of the more ephemeral projects. It was our installation in the ongoing exhibition program that Eric set up at SCI-Arc, which we did in, I think, 2005. And the words that went by there rather quickly were sort of, it was a brainstorming session, and we kind of dropped everything in the office to work on this because the lead time was quite short, and all the ambitions came out. Can we go back to that? Or
yeah, sure.
And perhaps contradictory: presence, aura, plastic, economy, limit, parameters, testing. I'm not going to read them all, but some of the ones that came up that we were really interested in, well, in terms of the installation, of which there had been 3 or 4 years prior to us doing them. We wanted to make sure that we worked on something that had, in the end, would deliver a presence. And that's a very kind of subjective term, but we wanted it to exist without explanation, without kind of references perhaps outside of that installation. And one of the things we got really interested in, and Sergio is here tonight, is an ongoing discussion about the idea of duende from Spain. And we have 2 videos we want to show, which we'll get to. I'll talk about that in a minute. So
yeah, I just wanted to add that, when Eric invited us to participate in the exhibition series, and knowing that it was an installation that, again, would be driven by an idea, there's no particular dilemma built into making an installation in the gallery that comes handed to you. So in a way, we realized we were interested in some of these things, and so when we don't encounter a dilemma, we invented one. And so this is the dilemma that we kind of posed for ourselves for how to occupy that space.
Yeah, how to work with an inanimate figure and make some kind of animate space with it. So here's SCI-Arc, and you're about 400 feet south of the gallery right now, in case you don't know. And we've been working on a number of experiments with Tensegrity that led up to it. We were very interested in this kind of composite interactive structural systems where you could work with compression members in line, and then also build into the rule set a kind of spectrum variation by adjusting sizes of members, et cetera, both tension and compression. And then I think this was the first time we taught 1A, undergraduate 1A together. We did an installation with the students of a rather large Tensegrity structure at the south end of the school, and sort of figured out a way of letting it dance around the stair and up through the space, and it really was actually a sort of a branching system, primitive branching system, kind of pulled off into the space in 2 different ways.
And this was a case of which often happens, and I know it's not unique to us, where as an instructor you're teaching in the school and you're realizing that you're pursuing a set of interests within the curriculum of the school, and that it's directing a kind of research that you're using the studio to both satisfy yourself and allow the students to explore at the same time. And it was something that we were sort of carrying with us at the time, so it had from a few years before.
And then also looking at performance artist Johan Lorbeer, where simply the act of redefining the data becomes a contested point within the urban realm. And if you don't know his work, you should look his work up, and you can see how he does this amazing suspension of these people. We were also really interested in the idea of the Dionysian, and so we were listening over and over again to Rite of Spring, and we're really interested in this clockwise, counterclockwise, and then these 2 guys get up. Erratic and stomping was a kind of architecture for us. This incessant stomping on the surface of the earth. And the moment when you're not on the earth, so to speak, is an important part of that poetic. And then secondly, the notion of duende. The same thing, the force that comes out through the earth into the dancer, the makeup of the player, or the matador, that is an undeniable force. No one can explain it, but it's a force called upon through that art. And we wanted to really bring those ideas of the madness of Stravsinky and the duende into the Stentorian piece that we did. And the transformation or translation of those 2 things was...
Yeah, I was just thinking, we taught a studio in Mexico City together, and it was the first time that I had been able to see flamenco live. And it was so amazing because at some moment, as Eric describes it, the dancer's feet move so quickly it appears as if they're levitating off the ground. And so, just at a kind of visceral level, we were really wondering how we would achieve that perhaps with a piece of architecture.
Well, visceral is a key point. So here are some early sketches of these kind of Stentorian figures, looking at it on the right as a sort of set of group of figures or dancers of which people would walk through, and then beginning to imagine the sort of elastic portions and the compression rings of the figures, and how we might be able to begin to adjust them in ways to start to reshape and animate the gallery space through their inflections. This is the back of that was the back of the brochure. And then here, some very simple models, beginning to look at compression rings and rubber bands and just completely primitive things. And one weekend we started picking up and trying to build and test to see what kind of behavior, what kind of presence, and what kind of possibilities.
And also here is a good example of how we wanted to enter into this problem in the most direct way we could imagine. And they were very simple, just very crude models that when we mentioned this idea about serious play, I mean, we would play with these constantly, photograph them and try to understand how they behaved.
And then starting to look at the deformations and variations in the computer and looking at them as groupings and within the setting of the gallery. And then other surface studies and beginning to look at ways of torquing and through changing the lengths of the elastics, begin to warp the kind of space around the figures. And so some ended up rather iconic and singular, and others began to really torque through the space. And I think the interplay between the two is what bring that aura of flamenco into the dilemma. And then also thinking about not only land art, but again, the inscription of the surface of the earth and the figure of the body as a participant in that. And further drawings, looking at figures and as sort of composers of geometry, so to speak. And here's the final installation. So you can see there's a set of Stentorian figures within the gallery. And here's